Let me take you to a completely alien world. A world so similar to ours, yet so very different. Here, you've been transported 445 million years ago to the Ordovician era. A complete water world, with regions such as modern-day North America being completely submerged underwater, with the Ordovician being home to prehistory's biggest oceans, the biggest of these being the Panthalastic Ocean, which covered around 70% of the Earth's surface. This being due to the fact that the Earth's sea levels during the Ordovician were around 200 to 600 meters, or around 650 to 1,900 feet higher than they are in the modern day, with life as we know it during this period being majorly bound to the giant oceans and seas that were so prevalent in this era, with the most common areas of life being in its shallow seas and ancient coral reefs respectively. This, however, did come with some major vulnerabilities when looking at it from an extinction point of view. Sudden ocean retreating, rapid cooling, heating, mass flooding, as well as deoxygenation of said giant oceans, led to an extremely deadly time for ocean life that was overwhelmed by such events for the most part. This, of course, being in reference to the extremely deadly Ordovician Silurian extinction, or otherwise Late Ordovician extinction. This was a massive event, being the second most severe mass extinction to hit Earth behind the devastating Permian mass extinction that would come 200 million years later, with up to 85% of all marine life during the Late Ordovician extinction dying off, causing a huge jogging in the entire evolutionary line of life as we know it during this time, with the heavily populated shallow sea habitats being completely ravaged and coral reefs being completely destroyed. With the Late Ordovician extinction being a multi-staged event that ensured that no area on Earth was left untouched, with it commonly being broken into two phases, these of which were only 1 million years apart of one another. Phase 1. The Glaciation Pulse. The supercontinent of the time Gondwana had been slowly migrating south, reaching the South Pole around 445 to 444 million years ago. This movement of the South Pole locked the continent into place for mass glaciation due to the largely cold temperatures around the South Pole. Think Antarctica of our modern day, but if Antarctica was over 7 times the size. This of course caused major problems for the oceans of the globe, freezing up to a whopping 5 to 8% of global water into glaciers. This compared to our modern 2.1% of today, you can imagine the damage. Expansion of these glaciers created sea levels to drop rapidly, dropping a massive 70 to 100 meters, or around 230 to 330 feet, in only around 300,000 years. To put it in perspective, that's around the same sea level drops we saw in the last ice age, when the world looked like this. As well as the sea levels dropping, the global temperatures dropped around 10 Celsius or around 50 Fahrenheit, with the combination of these events being extremely effective to the majority of life which lived in shallow sea habitats, with the first phase of this mass extinction being accredited to being the more damaging half, with the first phase killing some vital species for ecosystems at the time. Around 50% of all trilobite species at the time, 70% of all coral species at the time, and up to 90 to 95 of more vulnerable species, such as graptolites, all suffering extinction during this first phase, all either being victim to the intense cold or their habitat drying up as a result of glaciers, with only the versatile or deep water organisms being able to survive this first phase. This only was the beginning, however, as the second phase would shortly come, only around 1 million years later, as a sort of finisher round to any that managed to bear through the first. Phase 2, the deglaciation pulse. Following the first pulse is the slightly less deadly, but just as formidable second phase of the Late Ordovician Mass Extinction, with aggressive volcanic activity disrupting the sudden ice age that had only just occurred around 1 million years prior, sending a second shock of rapid climate change for the species that had just survived. Rather this time around, a surge of volcanic eruptions completely melted the glaciers that had been built from Gondwana's earlier positioning in the South Pole. This unexpected climatical change flooded any recovering coastal habitats and completely altered any previous ocean currents and circulation, with the fresh water that had been built up within the massive glaciers releasing across surrounding seas, forming a layer above the salt water. This of which was devastating for the majority of marine species at the time, with the freshwater layer blocking any oxygen from circulating into the sea from the atmosphere, essentially deoxygenating huge parts of the world's oceans, leading to many species literally suffocating on the poorly oxygenated water. Essentially, species to the era's ecosystem were practically wiped during this time, already having been weakened from the previous pulse. Most notable of these being 30 to 50% of all conodont species, these being an eel-like vertebrate being one of the first alongside fish to have a backbone, 30 to 50% of all mollusk species, these being your snails, clams and cephalopods. As well as this, a general increase in those already affected from the previous pulse can be seen, with an additional 50% to the death of those remaining trilobite species from the first pulse, and an additional 40 to 60% of all coral species remaining from the first pulse. With this wiping out of so many species, making the various global ecosystems far less complex and diverse, with the few species that remained generally honing in on a set of builds rather than branching out towards unique designs in later eras to come. Following the Late Ordovician Mass Extinction, winners of this can be clearly seen, with the time after often appropriately being named the Age of Fishes. Fish having survived almost entirely unscathed, being very versatile geographically, often switching environments far easier due to their more robust structures and tolerance to lower oxygen levels, with fish only developing their build further following the mass extinction, with further developments being seen in their armour, with advanced bone structures, and eventually in their evolving of some of the first jaws ever seen on Earth. Later, of course, this success being displayed in an array of species that would follow, with the evolution of sharks, amphibians, reptiles, and later mammals, all of which having originated from the successful fish species that originally survived that Late Ordovician mass extinction. In addition, other species within the fish family can be seen holding this title of winner, this being clear with the apex predators that would come to rise following the loss of the previous apex predators prior to the mass extinction, such as Camarasaurus. With this void, the most prominent faction that would come to replace them being that of the placoderms, with the most famous of these being that of the Dunkleosteus, with placoderms evolving from the jawed fish that later came during the Silurian as a result of the fish that survived the Late Ordovician mass extinction, with Dunkleosteus reaching around 6 to 10 meters, or around 20 to 33 feet. It became just one of the mighty predators that dominated the Devonian, all of which was due to the fish's rapid success in the Late Ordovician following the mass extinction that occurred. Following the 10 to 30 million year build-up that came after the Late Ordovician Mass Extinction, while not quite to the level of fish in their grand success, many species had indeed successfully rebuilt. Coral reefs were rebuilt fully in brand new systems to be more versatile and prepared. Trilobite populations, while staying very simple and less complex in design, entirely repopulated. Among as well other species such as sponges, brachiopods, and clinoids, with the late Ordovician mass extinction overall giving evolution a huge reset in terms of pathways and the ways it developed, with the competition over the empty spaces that suddenly were available, diverting different species greatly rather than what would have followed naturally. With it not being an exaggeration to say that the many different classes of animal that we know of today, such as mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, would not have been anything alike they would be today, if existed at all, if not for such a mass extinction as the late Ordovician mass extinction, in which favoured fish so heavily. Overall, with the life that prevailed in the mass extinction only being one of 5 examples in which our evolutionary history could have been completely changed, is a wild thought, with the survival of ancient fish, amphibians, and tiny mammals all leading up to what would be today as humans. However, with all that, I think that's all I have for today. If you have any video ideas or any part 2s you want me to cover, such as one of the other 4 mass extinctions for example, feel free to leave a comment, as I do read them all. But with that, I thank you and goodbye.